Eleanor Morgan kept her back to the pale morning light, as if the cold could be willed away like an unwelcome guest. The ranch lay spread across the low valley, patchwork pastures and scrubby hedgerows, a weathered corral, and the white two-story house with its sagging porch where 3 generations had watched the sun rise and set over Silver Ridge. She had been the steady hand here for decades, mending fences at dawn, coaxing temperamental mares into harness, reading the slow weather from the color of clouds. The place had once been a name etched into cattle tags and a legacy in the land. Now it was a ledger in someone else's office, a string of numbers that, when read aloud, sounded like a verdict. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, stamped with a formal red that made her stomach drop every time she glimpsed it on the kitchen table. 21 days, the notice said in cold print. Pay in full or see the land put up at auction. She kept the paper folded beneath a dishcloth, as if hiding it there made the words less true. Ellie was 58 and felt each year in how her hands ached in the cold, and how the early light no longer seemed to come for her. The herd had been thinned already, sold off in pieces until the corrals were mostly empty, the brand irons quiet on their rack. The pickup she'd once relied on sat under the barn awning, its engine a memory. There was no one to call for help. Her husband Robert had been gone 5 years now, taken suddenly by a heart attack while repairing the south fence line. Their daughter Rebecca had moved to Chicago after college, building a life among skyscrapers and strangers, always urging her mother to be practical and sell the place. "It's just land, Mom," Rebecca had said during their last phone call, her voice crackling with static and distance. "You could have a nice condo in Denver, close to good hospitals. No more winters alone. But how do you sell your heartbeat?" Every corner of the ranch held memories. Rebecca's height marks on the kitchen door frame, Robert's rocking chair on the porch, her mother's piano in the living room, her grandmother's button collection displayed in shadow boxes along the hallway. This wasn't just land, it was the geography of her soul. "I've thought about giving up, about walking away and letting the bank have it all. Have you ever faced a decision that tears you apart? A choice between your pride and your survival?" Think about that for a moment. I'll tell you what changed everything for me after this short break. The storm came without warning, riding on winds that smelled of change and ancient earth. The rain hit the roof like angry fists, and for the first time in months, Ellie found herself awake with the house thrumming around her. She listened to the weather, to the trees that bowed down to the sky, and the tin-covered barn that complained in groans and rattles. Near midnight, a sound like thunder but sharper cracked through the valley. Not lightning, something solid giving way. Ellie sat upright in bed, heart pounding, as her border collies whined at the bedroom door. When morning showed its face, the pasture was a bruise of water, and the world smelled new and raw. It was on that washed morning, with her boots caked in mud, that she saw the tear in the hillside, where a shallow draw had been the night before. A jagged black mouth now gaped at the edge of the arroyo. The storm had stripped away the thin veneer of topsoil and revealed a hollow she'd never noticed in a lifetime of walking those ridges. Cold air came out of it like breath, with a metallic edge and the scent of things kept from sunlight for too long. Ellie stood motionless, feeling something like a compass inside her chest swing toward the dark. She should have been sensible. This land had swallowed men before. Sinkholes and quagmire had taken equipment and pride alike. But when she looked at the mouth of the hill, she did not see hazard first. She saw possibility, a place the ranch had been keeping secret, perhaps for as long as the Morgans had owned it. She gathered an oil lamp, a length of rope, and the old pickaxe that had belonged to her father. The weight of it, something that steadied more than the metal ever could. The passage bent quickly inward. At first, the walls pressed close enough to brush her shoulders, the limestone rough against her jacket. The air grew dense with the scent of mineral darkness. Not the organic decay of a natural cave, but something worked by human hands. Her lamp cast wavering shadows that danced like spirits along the rough-hewn walls. As the ceiling opened upward, stalactites caught the light like ancient daggers. The passage widened into a chamber where the evidence of human presence became unmistakable. An old hearth circle laid with stones, charcoal remnants still visible, tools abandoned against walls, pickaxes with rotted handles, shovels eaten by rust, and carved into the supporting beams, dates 1859, 1861, 1862. Ellie's fingers traced the numbers, feeling the grain of wood that had witnessed a different century. Her lamp revealed narrow-gauge tracks embedded in the packed earth floor, disappearing into a side tunnel now partially collapsed. This was no natural formation but a deliberate excavation, a mine. Stories her grandfather had told her as a child suddenly took on new meaning. Tales of the silver boom that had created towns overnight and abandoned them just as quickly. But he'd never mentioned mining on Morgan land. The deeper she ventured, the more the mine revealed its secrets. Support beams angled precariously in some places, while other passages had completely caved in. The work had been extensive, suggesting substantial investment and significant fines. When she reached a large chamber at the end of the main passage, Ellie's light fell upon something that made her breath catch. A massive oak chest bound with iron straps, half buried under rockfall in an alcove. The chest was no miner's toolbox, but something more deliberate, a strong box meant to preserve valuables. With trembling hands and the help of her father's pickaxe, Ellie cleared away the debris. The lock had long since deteriorated to rust, allowing the lid to creak open under her touch. Inside lay treasure both literal and historical. Several small gold bars, blackened with age but unmistakable in their weight and gleam, and stacks of documents protected by oilcloth wrappings. The papers were a time capsule, ledgers recording ore extraction, payroll records, and maps of veins that ran beneath the very hills she had grazed cattle upon for decades. The company name, Silver Creek Mining Co., was embossed on leather-bound books, alongside dates from 1858 to 1863. Most significant was an official-looking document bearing territorial government seals and signatures, mineral rights granted to Silver Creek Mining Company, dated 1858. Ellie wrapped the contents carefully, securing the smaller gold bars in her jacket pockets and bundling the documents in canvas. The knowledge of what she'd found pulsed inside her like a second heartbeat, unbearable if kept close, dangerous if exposed to the wrong eyes. News, needless and sharp as frost, slid through Silver Ridge as news does in small places, faster than truth, more persistent than fact. By afternoon, Ellie sensed the changed glances at Hanson's general store. Fred Miller, who'd barely acknowledged her for years, suddenly had questions about that odd collapse on her property. Marjorie at the diner lingered at her table, fishing for details about what the storm had uncovered. "Heard there might be something interesting up on your place, Ellie," Marjorie said, refilling her coffee cup for the third time without being asked. "Tom Harris said his nephew was riding fence and saw you coming out of some kind of hole in the ground." Ellie maintained her composure, decades of poker faces at cattle auctions serving her well. Just checking storm damage. Nothing worth gossiping about. But she knew better. In a town like Silver Ridge, secrets had the half-life of uranium. She finished her errands with tight-lipped determination, then drove straight to the office of Catherine Torres, the only attorney in 3 counties who wasn't in someone's pocket. Kate's office occupied the second floor of the old mercantile building, its windows overlooking Main Street. Inside, law books lined the walls, and framed degrees hung beside black and white photographs of the town's early days. Kate herself sat behind a desk of scarred oak, silver streaking her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. At 62, Kate had the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed the first time. She'd arrived in Silver Ridge 15 years ago after a brutal divorce, building her practice from nothing through sheer force of will. The two women shared a nodding acquaintance, bound by mutual respect for those who stood their ground in a world that preferred them compliant. Mining rights, Kate said, carefully examining the brittle documents spread across her desk, her fingers moving with practiced precision. And legitimate by the look of them. Silver Creek Mining Company. They were one of the larger operations during the silver boom, but disappeared almost overnight in '63. She glanced up sharply. You found these in a cave on your property? Ellie nodded. Along with other things. Understanding passed between them without words. Kate didn't ask about gold. Ellie didn't volunteer the information. What mattered were the papers, proof of rights that could be made to stand in daylight. We'll need to file with the county immediately, Kate said, already reaching for forms. Establish your claim before anyone else gets ideas. Your family's owned that land since 1867. My great-grandfather, Joseph Morgan, bought it from the territory government. Kate's fingers stilled. That's only 4 years after Silver Creek vanished. Interesting timing. She turned one of the maps, studying the veins marked in faded ink. There's history here we're not seeing yet. She looked up at Ellie, something softer briefly crossing her professional demeanor. I know what it's like to fight for what's yours when everyone expects you to just walk away. After my divorce, my ex's family tried to force me to sell our house at half its value. I lived on ramen for a year to keep my home. She straightened, businesslike again. We'll file first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, tell no one about this. Not even people you trust. Sometimes allies appear in the most unexpected places. Where are you listening to this story right now? In your car, at home, or perhaps while doing chores? Subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss the next part of the story, coming right after this short break. By the time Ellie filed her claim with the county courthouse, Harrison Wells already knew about the cave. Wells owned half the businesses in Silver Ridge, the bank that held Ellie's mortgage, the largest real estate company, the new shopping development on the edge of town. At 65, with silver hair and custom suits, he looked more like a senator than a small-town power broker. 3 generations of Wells men had accumulated influence in the county like other families accumulated china. Piece by careful piece, displayed prominently but used with calculated precision. He was waiting on her porch when she returned from Kate's office, his black Cadillac parked in her drive like an omen. The dogs bristled at his presence, circling warily as Ellie approached. Eleanor, he said, rising from her own rocking chair with the casual entitlement of wealth. I think we need to talk about what you found on your property. Ellie stood her ground at the bottom of the steps. I wasn't aware I'd found anything that concerned you, Harrison. His smile never reached his eyes. Oh, but it does concern me. Very directly, in fact. He straightened his jacket, a gesture designed to draw attention to its obvious quality. The Silver Creek Mining Company was founded by my great-grandfather, James Wells. Those mineral rights you're trying to claim, they belong to my family. The world seemed to tilt slightly under Ellie's feet, but she kept her expression neutral. My family has owned this land for over 150 years. Owning the surface doesn't mean you own what lies beneath. His voice hardened. I have documents that prove Silver Creek's claims were never legally abandoned. My family has been waiting for the right time to reestablish operations. Then why wait until now? Ellie challenged. Something flickered across his face. Calculation, perhaps, or deeper anger. Technology changes. What wasn't profitable in 1863 is very profitable now. He stepped down, too close. I'll make this simple, Eleanor. I'll pay off your mortgage in full, plus $50,000 if you'll withdraw your claim and sell me the property. The offer hung in the air between them, enough to clear her debts and start fresh somewhere else, enough to ease the burden of her remaining years. For a fleeting moment, Ellie imagined freedom from worry, perhaps a small house in town, no more frozen pipes in winter or endless fence repairs, but not enough to replace 3 generations of Morgan's sweat soaked into this soil. Not interested, she said flatly. Harrison's pleasant mask slipped. Don't be a fool. You're weeks away from losing this place anyway. I'm offering you dignity. I find my dignity just fine without your help. His jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing at his temple. Think it over, Eleanor. Stubbornness isn't a retirement plan. He moved toward his car, then paused. Oh, and I should mention, I purchased your mortgage from First National last week. I'm your lender now. His smile returned, cold as December. 20 days left on that notice. I suggest you use them wisely. As his Cadillac disappeared down the drive, Ellie felt the weight of what she'd discovered shifting, from potential salvation to dangerous complication. Wells wouldn't stop with polite offers. Men like him considered persistence a virtue and defeat an impossibility. The fire came 3 nights later. Ellie woke to frantic barking, the night air already thick with smoke. The barn was ablaze, flames licking skyward from the hayloft. She ran across the yard in her nightgown, throwing open stall doors, driving panicked horses into the pasture. The ancient timbers groaned and cracked as the roof began to collapse. By dawn, nothing remained but smoking ruins and the acrid scent of accelerant that no accidental fire would leave behind. The horses huddled in the far pasture, steam rising from their backs in the cold morning air. While Ellie stood amid ashes, face streaked with soot, Sheriff Michael Hayes knelt in the blackened debris, his weathered face grim beneath his uniform hat. At 60, Hayes had the deliberate movements of a man who understood that justice and law were not always the same thing. This was deliberate, Ellie. No question. He rubbed a smudge of oily residue between his fingers. Kerosene, poured generous around the support posts. Wells, she said, voice rough from smoke. Hayes sighed. Probably, but proving it, he shook his head. Men like him don't leave fingerprints. They leave rumors and fear, but nothing that sticks in court. Word spread through Silver Ridge by noon. What Ellie didn't expect was the response. Thomas Blackwood arrived first, 70 years old and still straight-backed as the pines, leading a truck filled with lumber. He'd been her father's foreman decades ago, retired now but still with hands that remembered work. Can't have Morgan horses without a Morgan barn, was all he said, already unloading timber. Others followed throughout the day. The Martinez family from the next property, Ruth Alvarez and her sons from the bakery in town, even Pastor Collins and 3 deacons from the church. By sunset, the framework of a new barn stood where the old one had fallen. Ruth pressed a thermos of coffee into Ellie's hands as they watched the men secure roof beams. Shorter and more solid than Ellie, Ruth had arms strong from decades of kneading dough and eyes that missed nothing. Harrison's been talking all over town, she said quietly, saying the mine could bring jobs, tourism, a boom like the old days. Her eyes, dark and direct, held Ellie's. Some folks are listening. Others remember what his father was like, taking advantage whenever he could, foreclosing on half the farms during the drought of 75. My father used to say the Wells family had gold in their pockets and gravel in their hearts, Thomas added, joining them. His face, tanned to leather by decades of outdoor work, creased with memory. There's history between your families, Ellie, more than you know. That night, after everyone had gone, Thomas lingered on her porch, his voice low in the darkness. Your grandfather bought this land right after Silver Creek abandoned their operation. Always wondered why they left so suddenly. A company that size, with a productive mine. The records I found mentioned a collapse in '63, Ellie said. Thomas nodded slowly. That tracks with the stories. Bad collapse, men trapped. But there was more. Conflict with the Shoshone over water rights, rumors of claim jumping. He hesitated. And stories about James Wells, Harrison's great-grandfather, threatening workers who wanted to unionize. Man had a reputation for solving problems with a gun. So why would my great-grandfather buy land with a failed mine? That, Thomas said, is the question that's kept Harrison Wells awake at night for 40 years. He glanced toward the shadowed hills where the cave entrance lay. But there's something else you should know, that mine might have another entrance on what's now Wells' property. The old-timers used to talk about how the Silver Creek operation connected to workings on the North Ridge. Ellie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. If Wells could access the mine from his own property, her discovery might mean nothing. "Be careful, Ellie," Thomas said as he left. "Harrison Wells didn't get where he is by playing fair. He got there by making sure no one was left standing who could tell the true story." Rebecca Morgan's rental car arrived the following afternoon, dust billowing behind it on the long driveway. Ellie watched from the porch as her daughter emerged, tall and slim like her father, city polished in ways that made the ranch seem suddenly shabby. Their relationship had grown strained after Robert's death, when Rebecca had pushed for Ellie to sell the ranch and move closer to Chicago. Their phone calls had grown shorter, less frequent, edged with the unspoken accusation that Ellie valued land over family. "Mom," Rebecca said simply, crossing the yard with uncertain steps. Ellie hesitated only a moment before pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "You didn't have to come. You mentioned men with kerosene and a century-old mining dispute. Of course I had to come." Rebecca pulled back, studying her mother's face. "You look tired. It's been a complicated week." Inside, Rebecca moved through the house like someone revisiting a childhood museum, touching the piano keys with muscle memory, running her fingers along bookshelves, pausing at family photographs. "It's all exactly the same. Some things don't need changing." Rebecca turned, her expression softening. "I'm sorry about the barn, and I'm sorry for pushing you about selling. I just worry about you out here alone." "I'm not alone," Ellie said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I have neighbors who show up. Community." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Ellie explained everything. The storm, the cave, the documents, Wells' threats. Rebecca listened with growing concern, her art historian's mind already analyzing the situation. "Mom, if these documents are authentic, and if there's a significant mineral deposit on this property," her eyes widened, "we need to get them evaluated by experts. I have contacts at the museum who specialize in 19th century documentation." "Kate's already filing the claim with the county," Ellie said. "That's a start, but we need more." Rebecca's voice took on the focused tone Ellie recognized from childhood debates. "If Wells is threatening legal action, we need irrefutable authentication of your documents, and we need to understand exactly what happened in that mine." For the first time in years, Ellie saw her daughter not as an adversary pulling her away from the ranch, but as an ally bringing new resources to its defense. "Let's start in the attic," Rebecca suggested. "Family papers, old photographs, anything that might connect the Morgans to that mine or explain why great-great-grandfather bought this land." The attic yielded dust, spiders, and finally treasure of a different kind. A cedar chest containing family Bibles, letters, and daguerreotypes in velvet cases. Rebecca handled each item with professional reverence, carefully examining dates and names. "Look at this," she said suddenly, holding up a faded photograph. "That's the hillside where the cave entrance is now, isn't it? And that's a man standing at what looks like a mine entrance." Ellie took the photograph, studying the bearded figure in work clothes. "That could be Joseph Morgan, my great-grandfather. The entrance looks different, more structured, with proper support timbers." "So he knew about the mine when he bought the property," Rebecca mused. It wasn't just a surprise discovery. Deeper in the chest, they found a leather-bound journal with Sarah Morgan, 1867-1890, inscribed on the cover. Sarah, Joseph's wife, had recorded daily life on the ranch with meticulous detail: weather, crops, births and deaths of livestock and neighbors alike. An entry from August 1867 caught Rebecca's eye. Jay has sealed the lower entrance today. He says it is better left closed. A tomb and not a treasure. The men deserve better than to be forgotten. Mother and daughter exchanged glances. Tomb, Rebecca whispered. Before they could read further, a knock at the door announced Kate Torres, armed with legal papers and grave news. Wells has filed a counterclaim, she said without preamble, spreading documents across the kitchen table. He's produced what he claims is an agreement from 1865, supposedly signed by Joseph Morgan, acknowledging Silver Creek's continued mineral rights despite the land sale. That's impossible, Ellie protested. Why would my great-grandfather buy land but sign away the mining rights? Exactly, Kate agreed. I smell forgery. The judge has scheduled a hearing next week. Wells is pushing for rapid resolution, which tells me he's worried about what else might come to light if we have too much time to investigate. Rebecca leaned forward. We need a formal analysis of that document. I have colleagues at the Art Institute who specialize in historic document authentication. Kate nodded approvingly. Smart thinking, and we should get a mineral survey done immediately. Prove exactly what's down there and its value. As the women strategized at the table, Ellie felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years: the solidarity of not fighting alone. We all have family secrets, don't we? Things passed down through generations, sometimes spoken, sometimes not. What secrets might your family land or home hold? Think about that while we take a short break. The courthouse in Silver Ridge had stood since 1889, a limestone monument to frontier justice. Inside, beneath high windows and slowly turning ceiling fans, Ellie sat beside Kate as Harrison Wells and his attorney, an expensive import from Denver named Philip Mercer, presented their case to Judge Margaret Reynolds. Mercer produced a document with theatrical flourish, a yellowed paper dated 1865, bearing what appeared to be the signature of Joseph Morgan. This agreement clearly shows that Joseph Morgan acknowledged Silver Creek's continued mineral rights when he purchased the surface property, Mercer declared, his voice carrying through the packed courtroom. The Morgan family has never owned the resources beneath their land. Judge Reynolds, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, studied the document through narrow reading glasses. And this agreement has been, where exactly, for the past century and a half? In my client's family records, Your Honor. The Wells family has always known their rights were preserved. They simply waited for the appropriate time to exercise them. Rebecca, seated directly behind Ellie, leaned forward to whisper urgently in her mother's ear. Her art history degree in museum work had given her an eye for authenticity that Ellie had never fully appreciated until now. Mom, that signature doesn't match the ones in Sarah's journal. And the ink. It's too uniform for a pen from the 1860s. They used iron gall ink then, which oxidized unevenly over time. Kate immediately requested a formal analysis of both sets of documents. Judge Reynolds, her face impassive, granted the motion and recessed the hearing pending expert examination. Outside on the courthouse steps, Harrison approached, his confidence undiminished. Delaying tactics won't change the outcome, Eleanor. Rebecca stepped between them, her posture protective. Neither will forge documents, Mr. Wells. His eyes flickered with something dangerous. You Morgans never did know when to back down. It's why you've lost everything, generation after generation. We haven't lost yet, Ellie replied. No. His smile was thin. Then I suggest you watch your property very carefully tonight. Things have a way of disappearing when they're not properly protected. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ellie had never been a woman to ignore warnings. By nightfall, Thomas Blackwood had stationed himself in the rebuilt barn with a shotgun across his knees. Ruth's two adult sons kept watch from the ridge above the cave entrance. Kate Torres parked her Subaru behind the house, a small revolver she'd never fired resting uneasily in her lap. Rebecca and Ellie sat at the kitchen table with Sheriff Hayes, the house dark except for a single lamp. "He's desperate," Hayes said quietly. "The mineral survey came back yesterday. Gold, silver, and copper. Enough to make this the richest property in the county." He glanced at Ellie. "Your great-grandfather knew exactly what he was buying." Rebecca spread out the family Bible she'd found in the attic, alongside Sarah Morgan's journal. "Look at these birth and death records, all in Joseph Morgan's handwriting. Compare his signature to that agreement Wells produced." Even to untrained eyes, the differences were clear, the genuine flowing across the page, the forgery stiff and carefully constructed. Why would Harrison risk forgery when the evidence is so clear? Ellie wondered. Hayes shook his head. Because he's used to power without consequences. 3 generations of Wells men have run this county like their personal kingdom. Rebecca turned the journal's brittle pages, stopping at an entry from September 1867. As she read, her eyes widened. "Mom, listen to this." She began to read aloud. "Joseph will not speak of what happened in the mine, but I have pieced together enough from his nightmares. 13 men died when Wells ordered them to dig an unsafe tunnel, ignoring the foreman's warnings about unstable rock. Joseph was that foreman, fired a week before the collapse for refusing to risk his men's lives. After the disaster, Wells threatened any who would speak of his negligence, calling it an act of God." She turned the page, continuing, "My husband purchased this land not for profit, but to protect the final resting place of those men and to ensure Wells could never reopen the mine and hide his crimes. The Morgan name now stands guard over both treasure and tomb. I pray future generations remember this sacred trust when greed comes calling, as it surely will." Silence filled the kitchen. The true legacy of the Morgan land had never been cattle or crops, but a century-long vigil over a secret that the Wells family desperately needed to keep buried. "If those bodies are still in the mine," Hayes said slowly, "and if we can prove James Wells knew the tunnel was unsafe, then we're not just talking about mineral rights," Kate finished. "We're talking about historical negligence at best, and at worst, something close to murder." Outside, dogs began barking frantically. Headlights swept up the long drive, not one vehicle but several. Through the window they could see a line of pickup trucks approaching, Harrison's Cadillac in the lead. "Here we go," Hayes said grimly, checking his service weapon. The truck stopped in a semicircle before the house, men spilling out with flashlights and what looked unmistakably like rifles. Harrison stepped forward into the yard, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "Eleanor Morgan, I know you're in there. Come out now and we can discuss reasonable terms. Stay inside and my men will find that cave entrance with or without your cooperation." Ellie rose from the table with calm determination. Rebecca grabbed her arm. "Mom, don't." "I've faced down bulls and blizzards, honey. Harrison Wells doesn't scare me." She stepped onto the porch, the light behind her, Hayes and Thomas flanking her like sentinels. "This is private property, Harrison," she called. "You and your men need to leave immediately." Wells stepped closer, moonlight catching the silver in his hair. "The property that you'll lose in," he checked his watch with theatrical emphasis. 18 days? Don't be foolish, Eleanor. You know what's at stake here." "I do," she agreed. "That's why I called Judge Reynolds an hour ago. She was very interested to hear about what Sarah Morgan's journal says about your great-grandfather's role in the deaths of 13 miners." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "You're bluffing." "She's not," Rebecca said, stepping forward with the journal in her hands. "And I've already sent digital copies to colleagues at 3 different universities. The world will know what happened in that mine, Mr. Wells, one way or another. Sheriff Hayes moved to stand beside Ellie. I've also contacted the state police. There's enough evidence to warrant opening an investigation into historical workplace deaths and potential cover-up. Everyone with a weapon on this property right now is risking arrest for trespassing and intimidation. A tense silence stretched across the yard. Some of the men shifted uneasily, looking to Harrison for direction. One by one, they began to lower their rifles. The moment broke with the sound of approaching vehicles, county police cruisers, their lights painting the scene in red and blue pulses. Judge Reynolds herself stepped out of the lead car, her robes exchanged for jeans and a weathered jacket, but her authority undiminished. Mr. Wells, she called, her voice carrying across the yard. The forensic analysis came back early. The document you presented is a forgery, created with materials that didn't exist before 1880. She held up papers that gleamed white in the moonlight. I've signed an emergency injunction protecting the Morgan property and all claims pending final ruling. Anyone who violates it faces contempt charges and immediate arrest. Harrison's men began drifting back to their trucks, melting away like morning frost. Only Harrison himself remained, his face twisted with thwarted rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're doing. Those miners died in an accident. That's all. Trying to pin their deaths on my family is slander." "Then you have nothing to fear from a proper investigation," Judge Reynolds replied coolly. "I'm sure you'll cooperate fully with the State Historical Society when they examine the mine." His composure cracked completely. "You can't just dig up the past like this. Some things are meant to stay buried." "Not 13 men who deserve justice," Ellie said quietly. "Not the truth." Harrison stormed to his Cadillac, slamming the door with such force it echoed across the valley. As his headlights disappeared down the drive, Judge Reynolds turned to Ellie. "This will be complicated, Miss Morgan. Old crimes, old evidence. It won't be simple." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Ellie replied. The State Historical Society arrived 3 days later, a team of archaeologists and mining experts who approached the cave with reverent professionalism. Using ground-penetrating radar and modern mapping techniques, they confirmed what Sarah Morgan's journal had suggested. A collapsed side tunnel approximately 800 feet from the main entrance contained the remains of multiple individuals. The careful excavation took weeks, during which the story of Silver Creek Mine and the Morgan family's century-long vigil captured national attention. Journalists camped at the end of Ellie's driveway, while historians and legal scholars debated the ramifications of holding a family responsible for a 160-year-old workplace disaster. Harrison Wells was charged with multiple counts of evidence tampering, attempted fraud, and arson for the barn fire. A ranch hand, paid to set the blaze, had turned state's witness in exchange for leniency. Wells' carefully constructed empire began to crumble as investors withdrew, and locals recounted generations of intimidation and financial manipulation. 1 month after the standoff, Eleanor Morgan stood at the edge of the arroyo, watching as state officials carefully cataloged the cave's contents. The official ruling had come down emphatically in her favor. The mineral rights belonged to the Morgan family, as did all contents of the mine. More importantly, the 13 miners had been recovered and identified through historical records and modern forensic techniques. They would be properly interred in Silver Ridge Cemetery, with a monument listing their names and telling their story. Rebecca walked up beside her mother, linking their arms. The past month had transformed their relationship, forging a new understanding built on shared purpose rather than divergent dreams. "The museum curator called again," Rebecca said. "They're offering to create a permanent exhibit about Silver Creek, the miners, and the Morgan family's role in preserving the truth. They want to call it the Keepers of Memory." Ellie nodded. "I think that's fitting. Those men deserve to be remembered." They walked back toward the house together. past the new barn where Thomas was supervising the delivery of two young Morgan horses, the beginning of rebuilding their stock. Kate Torres waited on the porch, legal papers spread across the old wooden table. "The historical easement is ready for your signature," she said as they approached. "Once filed, this land can never be commercially mined, even by future generations of Morgans." Ellie signed without hesitation. "My great-grandfather didn't buy this land for gold. He bought it to protect those who'd been wronged. Seems right to honor that intention." The gold they had found, enough to pay off the mortgage and provide security for years to come, now sat in bank accounts, a portion already dedicated to a memorial fund for the miners' descendants. That evening, as sunset painted the valley in amber and gold, Ellie and Rebecca sat on the porch, watching the light fade from the hills. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said carefully. "My museum is opening a satellite location in Denver next year. They've offered me a position as regional curator." She hesitated. "It would put me just 3 hours away instead of across the country." Ellie kept her voice neutral, though her heart leapt. "That sounds like a good opportunity." "It is." Rebecca turned to face her mother. "But there's more. The cave, with its historical significance, could qualify for preservation grants. We could create a small interpretive center here at the ranch. Nothing commercial, just educational tours a few days a week. Income to supplement the ranching without exploiting the land. You've given this some thought." "I have." Rebecca's smile was tentative. "I spent so many years trying to pull you away from this place because I thought it was holding you back. I never understood it was holding you up, giving you roots and purpose." Ellie felt tears threaten. "It's never been just about the land." "I know that now." Rebecca reached for her mother's hand. "It's about legacy and responsibility. It's about keeping faith with the past while building something for the future." As darkness settled over the valley, Ellie thought about Joseph Morgan, who had chosen justice over profit, and Sarah, who had ensured the truth would survive. She thought about her father and mother, tending the land without ever revealing its secret burden. And she thought about herself and Rebecca, now entrusted with both truth and possibility. "Land remembers who tends it," she said softly, echoing her father's favorite saying. "And sometimes it reveals its secrets to those who care for it properly." In the distance, the newly erected fence around the cave entrance gleamed white in the moonlight, not to keep people out, but to mark a place of remembrance, a place where truth had finally emerged from darkness. "I've learned that sometimes the real treasure isn't what's buried in the ground," Ellie said, watching the first stars appear above the ridge. "It's what we build on top of it, the connections we nurture, the truths we protect, the stories we pass down to those who come after us." What legacy are you creating in your life? What stories will those who come after you tell about the choices you've made and the values you've protected? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of family bonds across generations.